We kind of got to the end of midway through last year and we thought, how can we help empower people to try and figure out what the next step forward for them? We'd like to start with the foundations of what is happening, what are people spending, what is their wealth, what are the opportunities?
When I've been at different points in my journey, starting as a 16-year-old, I was just all inspired, but it can be a bit daunting or feel like, do I even get started because what's the point?
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
So today I'm really excited because we're going to be getting some of the latest insights on building and keeping wealth. And we've got Sarah Megginson from Finder. She's the head of Editorial, and they've produced a fantastic and very deeply, it's, so much to learn from this report, their Finder Wealth Building Report. So we're going to go through some of that today. But thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Always my pleasure to chat about these things. Thank you for inviting me on.
Awesome. So in this report, I'm hoping to sort of unpack it, and we'll share a bit about your experience and mine as we go along the way as well. But tell us, through your research and I guess your journey as well, what are some of the key habits and mindsets that stand out as differentiating, I guess, the successful investors from those that struggle to get ahead?
Yeah, the secret sauce, as you might call it.
Yeah, I'll just dive straight in there.
Yeah, that is actually why we did this report, because we've spent the last 3 years really tracking the cost of living crisis and trying to help people navigate their way through that. And it has been such a heavy time for people with their finances. We kind of got to the end of, or midway through last year, and we thought, how can we help really empower people to try and figure out what the next step forward for them is? Because the situation for a lot of people, the situation has changed. They might have been planning to buy a home and now they can't, or whatever the map in front of them was, it might have changed. It might look different. So we thought, let's look at what you can actually do. And so to do that, we like to start with the foundations of what is happening, what are people spending, what is their wealth, what are the opportunities. And some of the key stats that came out are probably not very surprising to you with your background, but what are the...
I found them interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, really fascinating.
And inspirational as well. Like, I know when I've been at different points in my journey, starting out as a 16-year-old, I was just all inspired, but then sometimes it can be a bit, daunting or feel like, do I even get started because what's the point? And I get some people might be struggling that are listening to this, and some people might be doing really well. So
yeah,
hopefully you can I took it as inspo.
And that's our goal. We've always got an upbeat vibe. We're always trying to help empower people and figure out what is possible rather than, worry about or sit in that energy of, oh, this is all too hard. There is always a way forward. So one of the first things we found is that 97% of investors have a goal. So you can't really wing your way to success. And you can wing it to a degree. You can kind of just give it a crack and see where you land. But when you are strategic and you're really thinking ahead to what you want to do and what you want to achieve, your chances of success rate are exponentially higher. And I've got an example of this. One of my friends is a really high income earner, and he's been kind of dabbling in property for the last few years. And he's had some successes for sure. From his perspective, he's really happy with it. He's bought a couple of mining town properties, and he bought them for around 300 and sold them for 600,000 for 2 properties. So he's over the moon with that. But when I looked at what he was doing at the time, I kind of was like, oh, you sure that's what you want to do? Because you already earn a really high amount of money, and you're now adding a high cash flow property to that. You're going to pay almost half of your profits to the taxman. And in your situation, why aren't you looking at something that's going to have negative gearing benefits, something really strong capital growth prospects? So
he's realising gains there too. So he's going to have to pay that at his top marginal rate.
Exactly, which is exactly what's happened. He sold them and he's very happy. And I don't want to be the one to tell him how much he could have made. But he is one of those people.
Got some results.
Yeah, he got some results, which is great, but he didn't have a goal. He was just having a crack. He was like, I've got this money and I don't know what to do. And my friend recommended I do this, so I'm going to do it. He didn't have a goal. He still made some money, which is fantastic, but he didn't make as much as he could have, which brings me to our next point, which is that people that have investments and they have that really strategic goal around investments, they have a net median wealth of $1.1 million per person. And the people that don't have that strategy, and they don't invest, they're sitting at 930,000. So there's a couple of 100,000 difference there. And I should say, everyone in Australia who earns an income, you are an investor by default because you have a super fund. So you're investing in something, but that's what we would call passive investing. You're not actively, well, for most people, they're not actively choosing where that money goes. They're just set up in a fund. They might be balanced or growth or whatever mix they're in. But we all have some sort of investing exposure. But the difference between people who are really active and thoughtful about it is realized in the profits. If you have a goal and you have a strategy, you're just setting yourself up for success. And it's like anything in life, really. If you're planning to go on a holiday and you go, yeah, I think it'd be really great to go on a holiday. Let's see if we can make it work. And you kind of cobble together an itinerary and chuck it on your visa and pay it off over time. You're having that holiday. But it's not going to be as successful as if you really sit there and plan out what it's going to cost, save up for it, have a real itinerary, pre-book it. That's two very different experiences of the holiday. The same can be said of building your wealth. You can wing your way through it with a strategy and a plan. It just gets so much more achievable. And that's one of the things that I love about doing this work is helping people realize what is achievable. And especially if you've got time ahead of you, and if you're in your 20s or 30s, then you have a golden ticket because you've got so much time until you retire. And even if you're in your 40s and 50s, or if you're nearing retirement, there's still possibilities for you, and there's still ways that you can build your wealth over time. And I hope that theme kind of comes through in our report and helps people realize that there are opportunities for them. It's just a matter of figuring out what your risk profile is and what you're willing to do, and most importantly, what your goal is.
So we started out touching on some of our economic challenges in Australia. Does your report give us any sort of insights as to, how's this affecting investors and Australians in actually getting ahead? Because, the backdrop has been increasing interest rates, and, some of our East Coast capitals haven't been doing as well property-wise in the last few years, whereas others, especially Perth, we've been doing exceptionally well, and many East Coasters have been reaping the benefits of that. But all in all, we're all sort of hurting in the household living costs. So how has that sort of come through? And is there any ways that we can still keep trying to push ahead through the headwinds?
Yeah, absolutely. And we did, in the report, we dig into a little bit of global wealth and where Australia sits compared to other countries. And there's a annually produced report called the UBS Global Wealth Report. And that shows that in Australia, our wealth is more evenly distributed amongst households than it is in the UK and the US. There's actually a much bigger disparity between those who are wealthy and those who live in poverty over there. And especially in the United States, there is a much, much bigger proportion of people who are living in poverty. So I'll just jump through a couple of those stats really quickly. In the United States, the wealthiest 10% of people own 67% of the country's wealth, it's actually hard to visualize, but it means 2/3 of the wealth is held by the top 10%. So that is it's a really stark difference and a huge amount of top end wealth. Whereas in Australia, it's a bit more balanced. Our top 10% hold 44% of our wealth. Still an astronomical figure. It's still almost half, but it shows that there's a little bit more balance there. And then UK is somewhere in the middle. They're at 57% of the wealthiest people are in that top 10% of the country. So that's much more top heavy overseas. In Australia, we do have a bit more even distribution. Part of that is because majority of our wealth is held in our housing and our super. And everyone in Australia, if you're working and employed, you have the right to earn super, and you should be getting paid that automatically through your employers. So we do have a bit of a forced investing mechanism here that everyone has access to. But I find it interesting. We kind of talk about these broader trends and what's happening in the broader economy, whether it's overseas or in Australia. And it's super important to be aware of them, especially because Australia is such a small economy comparatively to the rest of the world. So things that are happening in China, in Russia, in America, in the UK, they are going to really impact us here. But I also think it's really important for investors or for anyone, but particularly for investors, to really stay focused on your own situation. Because one thing I've noticed people do a lot, and whether it's just my social group or it's people I'm interviewing for stories or investors that I've talked to, is they will talk about getting the timing right and waiting for something to happen. And we're just going to wait for interest rates to come down, just going to wait for the market to pick up or the market to fall or whatever it's going to be. And I can understand there's a fear around that, or there's a perception of I need to, make the best decision.
Well, right now at the moment, I hear from so many people, when interest rates reduce, I will then get in and buy something when I know it's not going to keep going up. And I think they're worried about whether they can continue to afford the property, which, they do need to do their sums and work out their budget and make sure that it's affordable under different scenarios. But I think with a lot of other people also sitting on the sideline going, I'm going to wait until interest rates start going down, it's then the best opportunities are going to be past.
Yes. And if you're waiting for interest rates to go down, what do you think other people are doing? So then by the time you try to buy, there's going to be heaps more competition. And I think I've seen it in the last few years in particular, pretty much from the beginning of COVID, we have just had the most volatility ever, for when COVID first hit and we had all of those rental moratoriums and the bottom fell out of a lot of markets for just like 2 months. And I can remember in my street in particular, we had a house for sale in our street, and it must have been an urgent sale because they put it on the market for 900,000 and they immediately accepted 800,000. And now you can't, within 2 years, you couldn't buy into our street for under 1.5 million. So that person has made a very quick decision based on that market right then. And whoever bought their property got the steal of the decade. But all of the stuff that's happening outside of it outside of you is so much less important than what you have the capability to do right now and what your risk profile is. So if you're looking at buying a property and you've crunched the numbers and you're like, worked out what you can afford, you've worked out what your borrowing power is, and everything is all kind of stacking up and you're comfortable with it, but you're waiting for interest rates to fall or property prices to come down, or I just want to have X more dollars in the bank. Like, you could be sitting in that analysis paralysis for years, if not decades. And that time in the market is what is going to build your wealth. And I always, when I'm talking to people about things like this, I say, think about, like, if you could go back in time 15, 20 years ago, would you have bought a property, at that price? And would you have bought it if it was the peak of the market?
Well, even now, like, everyone says, I wish I'd bought another one or two when COVID hit in 2020 or before COVID in Perth, because things have nearly doubled in Perth, or more than doubled in some cases. So, yeah.
And which is why there is that saying, right, that the best time to buy a property is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Because in 20 years from now, you're going to look back and go, can you believe when we could buy in Perth for under $1 million? Can you believe when you can get an apartment with a beachside view and it was less than $3 million? Like, we're going to be looking back, and the opportunities that we have today are going to seem incredible. I remember when I first started out as a finance journalist, it was the mid-2000s. It was just before the global financial crisis. And in Sydney, the median property price was $400,000. And I remember going to this economic briefing, and they said, in 15 years, Sydney is going to hit $1 million. And that just seemed impossible as a median, just impossible. I was sitting there thinking, I was in my 20s, new journalist, and I was like, $400,000 to $1 million, that is absolutely unthinkable. That will never happen. If I could turn back time and buy a couple of properties in Sydney back then, that would be amazing.
Well, we all would, yes.
We all would, right? And so I hope that what people kind of take from this is that you can wait and you can time the market and you can try to get all your moons aligned and your ducks in a row. But the better race to run, in my view, is the one where you are just looking at your situation and what you can comfortably afford. Because I'll just take, for example, the property I live in the last 5 years, its value on paper has gone from 900,000 to COVID hitting, and people were offering in our street 650, 700, 750, 800. So it was dipping. Then it's gone up to, I think the highest valuation was 1.9. It's now starting to moderate. It probably sits at about 1.6, 1.7 now. And none of that means anything to me except when I go to refinance to get equity out if I want to invest. But other than that, if I'm not selling it, it's all kind of ones and zeros. It's numbers on a page, and I don't concern myself with it because my home is something that I'm not planning to really sell anytime soon. If we ever did leave this house, we would keep it as an investment. I plan to own this house until I die and my kids take it in inheritance. But, so I don't get caught up in those numbers. And I even had, the real estate agents call you all the time. And one called me the other day, said, it's a really strong market. I could get you a really good price for your property. And I said, I bet you could, but then I would be paying a very good price for someone else's property. So I'm not planning to sell anytime soon. I would like to hold onto this forever. And I think when you shift your mindset then and you just stop paying attention to, well, of course you're going to pay attention. You're going to be aware of what's going on. But when you stop letting that be the main character in your decision making, it completely changes your investing roadmap, because you're now looking at what can I do? You're not chasing the market. You're not at the whim of other people's or what people are telling you or what experts are telling you. We know that experts can get it wrong consistently, that predictions can change and forecasts can change. So if you're pegging your future wealth on all of that data and those people, that to me is a bigger risk than buying a property at the wrong time. So yeah, I would suggest just think about what your goals are and try to set your plan up around that rather than what's happening in the world economy.
Well, your time horizon makes a huge difference in that too, where you just said that you plan to stay there forever. That's a very different mindset too. I'm trying to turn a buck in 6 months and, gamble if prices are going to increase.
Exactly. And that comes back to that first point, right? Your goals, knowing what your goals are helps you make really informed decisions. It makes the quality of your data so much better.
So we've touched on a few mindset things here. Like obviously there's a different mindset between investors and non-investors. What are some of the shifts you think to bridge that gap and, transition from just saving money to that more actively building wealth?
Yeah, such a great question. And I think one of the things that it always comes back to is fear, especially because money, for a lot of people, certainly for me, my story around money was that money equals stability and security and safety. So I'm not going to gamble with that and put my safety at risk. And that's what it feels like for a lot of people. There's a lot of fear of making the wrong decision, of investing in the wrong property, investing in the wrong shares, investing at the wrong time. It's all fear, fear, fear. And I think the biggest mindset shift that investors make is being able to understand that there are risks and that they might eventuate and you will be okay. And I've got a couple of examples here. I think in our data, we showed that, and I've just lost the specific data point, but I think it's the average investor admits to losing $70,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, I found that really interesting. Made me feel better about
some
of my losses.
Absolutely. And the reason why the average investor has a loss on the books is because you absolutely cannot win every time. It's just not, we are not all Messi. Sorry, my son is a football player, a soccer fan, so Messi is his favorite person, and we talk about him all the time. He win. We can't do that in life. We are going to sometimes invest in something that doesn't pan out. And I can remember when I was starting out in my 20s as an investor, and that was unthinkable to me. The idea of losing money was just, I'd rather not dip into this unless it is a sure thing. And my mindset has shifted so much on that. And I have lost a ton of money. I've bought properties that didn't grow in value. I've bought properties that went backwards in value. I've even invested, I think I've lost about 75,000 in a development that was meant to happen just over COVID, and then COVID hit and it all got, shit hit the fan, and that money is just gone now, forever gone. And the idea of that in my past, the idea of like $70,000 gone, not possible. I could not have reconciled it. I never play with money I can't afford to lose. So even when we were investing in these things, I always make sure that our house is safe and that nothing is putting that at risk. But also you learn that with those big risks, that's the opportunity for the big wins. So I have had those losses, but I have also had properties that have doubled in value or even more, or that have, I've had renovation projects that have turned really good profits for us. So we've had those situations where the money has come through, and as you invest more and you get more experience, you learn from your mistakes and you realize that it's not going to be a straight line. But when you do have those mistakes, you figure out how to learn from them, how to not hopefully do it again and again, how to protect yourself a bit better next time. And you adjust. I guess it's the same way to me. I think about if you're going to if you're going to eat out, if you want to go eat out at a restaurant, you can go to the same restaurant every time because you know that you're going to get the same meal and it's going to be consistent, it's going to be good. And for some people, that's fine. And that's someone who's very risk averse and they're just going to pay their mortgage every month and not invest. And they're very comfortable in that space. That's great. Or you can be the type of person that will try different restaurants and different price points and try different meals. And something you're not going to get every single meal is going to be the best meal you've ever had and make you want to go back. Sometimes you're going to have a total dud. And sometimes you're going to spend $200 on a date night and it's going to be awful. And that's the risk that you run of having an adventurous life. So just make sure you're not playing with more money than you can afford to lose. And, everyone has a different risk profile. It's a really important part of your investing journey. But once you found out those boundaries of where you're comfortable, make sure you've then got a goal and have fun with that journey rather than that sticking in that fear mindset that can keep you thinking quite small.
Well, I found that as I go through the different stages of my investing, my risk profile sort of changes. When you're starting out, and it's just you're not married, you've got no kids, it's probably not the end of the world. Well, it seems the end of the world when you lose any kind of money just there at that point in time, but you've got time on your side to restart and, regroup. But it's very different as you start to get more wealth behind you and you're a bit more protective of what you've got. You don't need to probably take as much risk. And then, I can see as I get older, and some of our clients, obviously, when they're going into retirement, into transitioning into retirement, into those sorts of phases, they don't have as much time on their side left yet. So different risk profile again as to what they need to look for in their investments.
That's exactly right. And the point you make there that I think is so important is you don't have to figure this out alone. There are so many really smart, really well-qualified, credentialed people out there, such as yourself. And depending on what journey you're taking, you can meet with property advisors, accountants, with financial advisors, and all sorts of people that can help take some of this risk out of it for you and help explain it to you. One thing that, we used to come across a lot back when in our magazine days was there used to be this kind of proliferation of experts who were not actual experts. They were just trying to sell you something and pretend that they were an expert. And these days I think it's much easier to spot those frauds and the fakes because there's so much information online and you can really qualify the people that you're working with and check the reviews and make sure that they're reputable and that they're actually going to take you on a journey towards building wealth, that they have the credentials and that they have the kind of runs on the board to help you do that. But working with an expert is a fantastic shortcut to getting the results you want because you've got someone supporting you and helping you on this journey. You don't have to try and figure it all out on your own when you've got access to so many smart people.
Well, that's true. I've loved having my different mentors and experts around me along the way. And when I originally started investing, Michael Yardney was helping me with a renovation when I was early 20s. And it was your show that I heard him on, which prompted me to get you on here. So he was we were just on the forums and he was helping me with input on, my renovation budget and where to get the best value add for the money I was spending. And we were just two randoms on a forum back in the early 20s.
Fantastic.
Gone on to become a bit of a mentor and friend as well. So I have those different people that it's awesome to be able to bounce things around with and regardless of where you're at, there's so much value in surrounding yourself with the right people.
1,000%. And that's something that is so available at a low cost these days too. There's a lot of forums and things online, but I think also you've got to be really mindful of your sources and where you get your information from. There's some sort of statistic. It's something like 92% of the stuff that people share on social media is not accurate or it's not suitable for everyone. And, even the things that I'm talking about here, when I say, invest in property within the parameters of your risk profile, that is also really, it depends on your personal goals, your budget, your income, your partner, your family. There's so many things, so many variables that go into what the right decision is for you. And anyone that's trying to tell you this is a one-size-fits-all solution I would be really cautious because the best, even you and I, we both have partners and children, but we would have really different possibly really different risk profiles and goals and, different strategies would work for each of us. So there's no such thing as one way to do it, which I think is part of the joy of it. There is no single path to wealth. There's just a lot of different things you can do, a lot of different ways you can look at it, and finding the right way for you is part of that joy of that journey is going to be playing with different things. Some will work better than others, and hopefully you'll enjoy it along the way and it won't be bringing you heaps of stress.
So you've touched on in your report the importance of financial literacy and just how critical that is. And some of our listeners are probably sick of me, finding different ways to come at this topic, because I never placed anywhere near as much importance on it when I was starting out. And I sort of thought, oh, well, when I have money or get money, then I'll worry about it. And there was a sort of a critical point where I worked out that regardless of however much I had, I never seemed to have any left. And some of this, and I really had to go deeper into changing my habits and getting those right before I eventually went on to, get the money. So tell us some of the insights in the report, because there were some really interesting ones.
Yes. Gosh, financial literacy it's really the cornerstone to your wealth. And when you say literacy, it's kind of a fancy word of just saying that the foundations and the basics of it. And a kind of a good way to explain it, when we were doing this report at work, I was chatting with one of the girls in the office about it, talking to her. She was working on some of the insurance parts of our website, and we were talking about this wealth report, and she was like looking at this and going, oh, this is actually quite cool, and I'm a bit inspired, and I feel like I should look into this more. And she goes, actually, my husband and I right now, I think we've got $200 a month that we could invest. Like, what could we do? What could that look like? And I sat with her and just said, look, let's just assume that all you did was that $200. She's very young. I think she's 26. I said, if we just put that $200 in your super for the next, you're 26, let's assume, until 65, put that $200 a month in every month. And with your, the tax benefits of that, and with your compounding super returns an average of 9% a year, by the time you retire, you would have an extra, can't remember the exact figure, but it was just over $700,000. And her jaw hit the floor. She was like, well, what are you talking about? How could it be that high? And I was like, well, you're so young. You've got almost 50 years of compound. Well, you've got 40 years of compounding ahead of you, plus the tax benefits you've got of salary sacrificing, and it's all going to be invested in compounding over time. That's going to be how you get there. And we worked it out. I think it was about $40,000 worth of contributions, but then the compounding gave all that magic to the figure. And it was like, I love watching a light bulb go off for someone where she was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And those are the kind of the basics of financial literacy, learning about compounding, learning about budgeting and understanding what you can afford to invest with, and how to manage your budget, how to look for money leaks. I think the three kind of pillars of your financial literacy is first, getting your budget under control. Second, automating and streamlining everything as much as possible. And the third is getting rid of your money leaks. And money leaks are different for everyone. It can be that you have not kind of compared any of your bills in years, in which case you're probably paying over the odds for everything.
I'm sure people can get a lot of help with that on your side.
Yeah, yes, that's what we try to help people do. We're helping you compare to save less and spend less. Save more and spend less, because that loyalty tax you pay by staying with the same company every year, it can cost you a small fortune. So that can be a money leak. It could be that you've got subscriptions and streaming and memberships that you're not using. That can be a money leak. Your spending habits. A lot of people, every time they leave the house, they spend money. It might be on a coffee or a drink or a bottle of water or a muffin. Like, a lot of people they're just used to tapping and spending and not really being in control of their spending. A lot of different ways that we can spend money. And in and of itself, it's not a problem. If you're living your life and enjoying it, and you're living within your means, you're not in debt, and you're enjoying that spending, that's not a big deal. But it's when you start with the gift of financial literacy, you start to look at it and go, oh, if I spent $100 less on coffees and drinks when I'm out in a month, just that $100, if I added it to my super, what could it be? Or if I invested it in an ETF fund, what could it be? And then obviously with property, you're leveraging those numbers into much, much, much bigger figures, because you're then starting with, say, deposit of $100,000 and figuring out what that could be, or you're using equity in your home and you're able to invest in 1 or 2 properties, and then suddenly the leverage of that growth is so much more, and you're creating a future for yourself that maybe wasn't possible before, or that you didn't think was possible before. And that all starts with those basics of financial literacy, of understanding the basics and having a real handle on your money, what you're spending, what you're saving, and what you can afford to invest. Again, it comes back to that, really the thing I said in the beginning about having goals. It's just really the simplest parts of the journey are the ones that set you up for success.
And often overlooked. So good reminders for everyone.
Yeah. And also, just like to your point earlier, it's so accessible. Like I think there's a lot of people who can try to make it seem like it's so complex and they have this secret formula for you. And if you just pay $5,000 to access this secret masterclass, they're going to unlock blah, blah, blah. It's not true. Like, I've seen behind the wizard's curtain to all of them, and everyone has a little bit of a secret sauce to help you with it. But there's only a handful of strategies that actually exist. There's only a handful of ways to do it. And it's really accessible to everyone once you know the basics. And when you choose to pay for an advisor, you're really paying for that support and that expertise, and hopefully they've done it before you, so they've learned a few mistakes and they can help lead you in the right direction. That's where I would be kind of encouraging people, if you're going to invest in your journey, those are the advisors you want on your team, people that are going to really help you make your decisions and make really informed decisions. Anyone that's trying to sell you a one-size-fits-all or a magical cure as if they're the only person in the world that knows how to do it, that's where I would have a bit of caution.
Definitely. So that kind of leads nicely into, how can listeners think about preparing for 2025? Have you got any sort of tips around there and strategies that they might want to take?
Yes, I think, again, I'm sounding like such a broken record, but I think really
consistency.
Yes, yeah, I'm nothing if not consistent, but I think it's really about thinking about what you want, not in 2025, not even in the next 5 years, but what does future you want? You know, like and depending on your age, to your point before, we all have different timelines. So depending on your age, let's just say, I often encourage people to think of 60. At 60, what would you want to be doing? And then start to work your way back. And you can then start to, in that context, it kind of doesn't matter what happens to property in 2025. If it goes up in price, if it goes down in price, it kind of doesn't matter. If your goal is, say you've got no properties right now and your goal is to retire in 25 years with 3 properties, then you got to start looking. Like, you got to start figuring out how to make that happen, and kind of waiting for interest rates to drop or for property market to change or any of those things. That's kind of by the by. Like, in 25 years, you're not going to be that bothered whether you paid $650,000 or $700,000 for that property, if delaying that meant you actually waited and you paid 8 or 9 or $1 million for that property, or if you delayed it so long you just didn't get it, which I've seen happen to people. They wait so long, I'm waiting for the market to fall, I'm waiting for the interest rates to drop, and now they're priced out of the market because it ran away from them, and the deposit they had actually can't keep up with where the market is now. That's a really disheartening place to be. So think about what you can actually achieve and what your goal is, and then you can start to work your way backwards. And there are so many ways to invest and to get ahead. So don't get discouraged if you're now in 2025 going, man, this was the year I was going to buy a property or buy my first home, and now the market is like, it's gotten so far away from me, it's never going to happen for me. If you're in that situation, then start to look at the other options. What else can you do? If a property is not on the cards for you this year, then what else can you do to get there? What other things could you invest in? What other opportunities are there available to you? You know, that old phrase, like, if you can't go over it or under it, go around it, go through it. Like, figure out how you can kind of reach your goals, and who can help you do that, which experts you can lean into, which groups you can try to align with and learn from, and just really figure out what your goals are and what steps you can take to get there.
Awesome. Well, that's probably a pretty good place to end things on. But there was so many other insights in this Finder Wealth Building Report. I'll make sure we put a link in the show notes to it. Definitely worth a read and unpacking it all for yourself.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.